Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. I have Chief Payovich from Crandall Independent School District Police Department. He has 20 years experience in law enforcement, 6 years as a police chief. Really looking forward to having him as today's guest. So welcome to the show, Chief Payovich. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for having this conversation. It's much needed in our profession.
Of course. No, I'm really looking forward to it. There were a few things that you said when we initially connected that I thought were really powerful and really intriguing. So I was hoping that first we could maybe rewind 20 years. How did you get started in this profession, and what did those 20 years look like for you?
Uh, well, so I started, I guess, when I was about 21, right around that age, so pretty young, right out of college. Um, I started my career with the Dallas Police Department. I did a bulk of my career there, or at least about a decade of my career there. Really got to experience a lot in those 10 years,
Yeah.
and it really set up my career for kind of where I'm at now. And it's really changed my mindset on how you should start the profession because, probably would have done things a little different early on had I known them, because, unfortunately in this career, we're often thrown into a lot of some of the most challenging, human conditions out there, and we have to deal with those conditions and navigate those. And I think it takes a toll on our throughout our career. It really takes a toll on our well-being. So
Yeah.
um, you know if you stay in this career long enough, and there's people that have been in a lot longer than me, it really can take a toll if you're not focusing on those things that matter.
Yeah. One of the conversations I've had recently is um, how do you prepare someone who is brand new to this career to be able to experience some of those things? I think that was the question mark that a lot of people have been asking of like, a lot of these things are unimaginable, or maybe you can't necessarily, like, you can maybe prepare generally, but how do you prepare for the actual experience of that in advance? I don't know the answer. Maybe you have some insights on that, but some people I've talked to are like, you can't prepare yourself for the sights, the smells, the sounds, like the actual experience of what you are going to be doing on a consistent basis. So how do you prepare?
Yeah, I don't know that you can prepare for everything you're going to be introduced to. Especially, if you work in an agency like the size of Dallas, just the things you're introduced to at such a young age
Yeah.
in your career. Oftentimes, I think one thing, I would tell somebody starting out early to prepare yourself is, don't chase perfection, chase preparation. The best thing you can do is prepare. While you can't prepare for all the things you're going to be introduced to, you can at least have your, I mean, because this career is going to test you. It's going to test you mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and there's a weight you carry, and it's the pressure to be everything to everyone, and it's often at the cost of your own well-being. So if you prepare early on, those things in your life, build habits early on that will help you, with that preparation. It's building, a mental resilience, emotional awareness, and physical discipline. And I think if you those are the things you need to prepare early in your career, because once you start later on, it becomes more difficult. So I think you can prepare while you'll um, be confronted with many different things throughout your career, and events and calls you'll go on. Um, but I think if you will start those habits early and prepare uh, for those things, and prepare your mental well-being for that stuff, it'll help it be a lot smoother.
I agree that proactive measures are always the best, right? And it's that prep work beforehand that's going to help to alleviate some of the stuff afterwards. But I also
Absolutely.
think that that's the hardest. It's hard, especially, and I think about this all the time. I try to remember, and relate to like my younger self, right? And like I know that when I was 21, 22, I wasn't thinking about that. Like I wasn't like, oh, how can I prepare for, what life is going to throw my way and how can I be more proactive? But my hope is that through these shared experiences and conversations that there's more awareness of how you can do it and the importance of doing that and front loading yourself a little bit so that you're prepared afterwards. Because in at least in this profession, you guys know that it's not if, it's when you're going to experience these types of things. So how can you be as prepared as possible? What are some of the things that had helped you? I know that you said that maybe there are some things that you wish that you would have done differently or that you wish you would have maybe done a little bit more proactively. What are some things that have helped you to offload some of those things along the way?
I think if there had been, more awareness early on, and of course you don't know what you don't know, but if I think again, it's building those habits early on because it doesn't get easier as you progress through your career. It only gets more difficult, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a little bit on the mindset, especially with seasoned officers in this career. Uh, it definitely only gets tougher. The resistance to change only gets tougher. And you'll see, cops can be some of the most stubborn people. So if you don't build those habits early on, um, it it gets to a point where it almost becomes impossible because and you'll see that in a lot of officers that become resistant to change and then it just becomes too late because of some life altering um, thing that may happen in their life and it could be many things but I honestly think it's just you've got to find that mindset and I think that's what needs to be happening on early on in your career and hopefully that'll be coming in the profession where it's kind of built in and drilled into everyone that hey these things have to be built early on um, because they just as you progress through your career just because life happens they become just even more hard to implement.
Yeah, there's this saying that I really like, and I think and it's not to discourage anyone who maybe isn't this way, but it's easier to stay fit than to get fit. And I think that anyone can relate to that, right? Like if you start things early in your life, it is easier to maintain those habits. It's easier to maintain that level of fitness, whether that's physically, mentally. It's a lot harder to have to get there, right? And to your point, especially the older we get, it's harder. It's harder to get back in shape. It's harder to create new habits because you're so ingrained in what you're already doing. So I think to anyone who's listening who's young, if you maintain that level of physical, mental fitness and preparedness as early as you can, then it's only going to set you up for success long term. And then you're not going to have to try to like dig yourself out of the hole that you've created by not doing that. I do want to talk a little bit about what you just said about the mindset and maybe what you're seeing and why. Why do you think that there is this resistance to change as we get older or as officers get older?
Well, I think there's lots of reasons. One of the there's several that I'll speak on that you see, and one of them is life. Life happens. Kids happen. Officers working extra jobs to help bring in generate more income. They're working long hours, 7 days a week. There's no time for fitness. There's no time for your own well being. So you're constantly working the job, going to these calls that may be traumatic that you don't have time to um, sit down and just kind of heal from and there's just no time in your day to seek that kind of help and it's not really there a lot of times the programs may be out there and maybe they don't know about them or they're not in their agencies or and a lot of agencies may be slower to adopt these programs that are there for their officers
Mhm.
um, or they may have some and the officers don't even know about them so but I tell you, when life happens, that's kind of usually the big factor, and it's not until some life altering event happens, sadly, that might be a heart attack or something like that, where they finally have that thing that they realize, okay, I've got to change my ways, and usually that's when you see a change. That's why, like you stated, if you don't start early and get fit and stay fit, it's hard to happen down the road.
Yeah. Well, and anyone who's listening, I mean, like, I've seen both ways, right? Like, I can relate to my life completely blowing up by not taking care of myself. And so, again, it's not a judgment because I know what it's like to not deal with the stuff I need to deal with and what that did to my life. And so it's really, yeah, I think we're speaking because you mentioned that you've had that a similar experience too, like where maybe things compiled over time and there's maybe more reactiveness than we would have liked, like that if we would have prepared ourselves proactively, maybe things would have been a little bit easier or better on us. And so I think that that's what we want, like we want people to learn from us and like our experiences so that they can set themselves up for success. And it's not this, well, now my wife is leaving me and now I got to figure it out, or now I just had a cardiac event, or now so I think that if you can set yourself up and you can start taking those steps today, then your future self is going to be so much happier.
Absolutely, yeah.
I also think that there's fear in the unknown, and change is hard for people because we don't know what's on the other side. Like there's comfortability in what is going on right now because you know what's going on right now. And so to say, like, hey, you need to change your ways or you need to change your habits, there's maybe some fear into a lot of things, like maybe fear of failure, fear of um, not knowing like what the result of that is going to be. For me, I had a lot of fear around all that stuff I shoved down for years and years and years, like what that would do to me if I had to revisit those things. There was fear in that. So I think that there's maybe a little bit of fear in change too. And maybe that's why it's just more comfortable to like keep the lid on things, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I think that, having these conversations is, sometimes it was a fear of just even talking about it. So I think having these conversations will allow that to be more talked about. And then also, hopefully be the change that's needed, especially in this profession, as we progress forward.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about you and your organization. I know that you're kind of in a rebuilding phase, and I was hoping that you could maybe give some insights into some of the things that you're doing organizationally.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, it doesn't come easy. Change, like you said, doesn't come easy, especially within an organization. But I think what you have to do is build a culture that is known that that's the way it is and that's the way it's going to be, but you have to build it into the culture. It can't just be, wellness can't be a perk. It has to be a critical infrastructure in your agency. Um, it has to be something that one that it's seen at the top down, that that I model it from the top down, and that um, we're intentional about it, because with everything going on, there's so much going on day to day, that if we're not intentional about trying to get these things done, they won't happen. And as part of I've got a 5-year strategic plan that we've introduced, and one of them is wellness, because of how important it is. And I'll tell you, I recently did a survey to the officers, and unfortunately, there's a lot of pushback on wanting mandatory fitness requirements, um, and I understand it, but I think they have to be there. I don't think it's an option in this line of work to be unfit. Unfortunately, we can't have that, because when you're unfit, you're unwell, you're unhealthy. There's just so many things that just culminate over time, and affects your overall wellness. So it's what I'm trying to build into the culture here. That way, when somebody hires on here, they know what they're coming into, and what the expectation is. So um, one of the things I'm trying to implement that and everything takes time, but I've reached out to one of the local psychologists we use,
Mhm.
and we're going to have yearly check-ins. All officers and armed personnel that we have in our district will be required to do a yearly check-in with a psychologist. It's just a check-in. It's not something that is out there to get the officers or anything like that. It's there to benefit them, and so it's things like that that you got to be intentional about, and hope that you know it's something that I'm implementing as it's mandatory. That way, it's not something where you hope that they'll kind of take part in, that they're required to take part in. So it's things like that that I think will change can change their lives.
I had someone recently ask me, they asked me a question on the podcast, and I was like, ooh, like I'm in the hot seat. Okay, like what's it gonna be, and they had asked that question. They're like, you've talked to a lot of chiefs, and what is the success of or what is gonna create that success? And my answer was culture. The more I talk to individuals like yourself, it is that it's like if it's not a part of the culture, if it's not woven into the fabric of who you are organizationally, I think it's really difficult to get buy-in and to get people engaging with things. And I don't think that you can just throw a program on top of a problem and then expect it to benefit anybody. I think that the hard work is kind of that boots on the ground effort of making sure that it's a part of who you guys are. And so that's what I've seen at least, and that's what I've heard from a lot of different leaders, including yourself, that really, really talk about and stress the importance of creating a healthy culture.
Yeah, and I think like you said, you got to start small. As we talked earlier, I'd mentioned I'm in training right now, and part of this training I'm in it's the main focus of this part of my training is wellness, and when we I talk to the other leaders in the room, the discussion is that you know there's when it comes to mandatory fitness and things like that, which I think at some point the state is probably going to come in and require at some point. We're kind of progressing that way, but that causes a problem when you have mandated stuff from the state versus implementing something that you can get your guys behind. Nothing that the state mandates ever turns out well because it's forced on you and it's not wanted. So it's better if an agency can get ahead of the curve and implement this. As some of the fears are, you've got officers that have been doing the job 20, 30, 40 years. It worries them when they hear, oh, if we don't keep our fitness up, we can lose our job. So it's things like that need to be answered as well. What does this look like, and how do we go from here? So I think, but I think agencies have to get ahead of that before, the state comes in and mandates, hey, you have to have this. So, and just overall, it makes your officers better. It makes your department better, because you know, we're going out there asking the officers to perform, and as I mentioned, in some of the most challenging situations. It's we've got imperfect people with imperfect information, going out to imperfect environments, and the expectation is perfection. So, and there's a lot of pressure that has on your mental health, your emotional, and and there's physical consequences to that over a career when you're asked to go out and perform like this. And if you're not taking care of yourself, it takes a toll on you.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, and I have so many things I want to say, so I'm hoping that we can kind of circle back because I think you brought up
For sure.
so many good points. But what is, because I think you're right. A lot of people, there's like that knee-jerk reaction when you say mandated. I think that there's a lot of pushback about that. But my question to you, and maybe you can give me some insight, what is the cost of not being physically fit in this career?
Well, I mean, we see it all the time. I know throughout my career in Dallas, I probably saw, probably around 10 suicides just in my 10 years in Dallas, and that's just Dallas alone. But when you're talking about there's agencies, in the Houston area, that one agency alone has suffered 4 suicides. So that's some of the things you see that compound over these careers that take a toll on these officers, and it's their mental health, it's their physical health. You know, I don't remember the statistics, but generally, when when I was at Dallas, the thing was every time an officer retired, the talk was how long do you give them before they drop dead, pretty much, because that was the thing. An officer would retire, and within a few months, they would die from something. So you want to outlive your pension and all those things, but sadly, as soon as officers are retiring, you see, because they're throughout their careers, they're going on calls, their stress levels high, it comes down, they're just on a roller coaster throughout their whole career, and then when they get to the end of it, it's taken a toll because they haven't focused on, they haven't been to the gym in 20 years, they haven't done anything. So you see the number of officers that don't make it past retirement. Um, they live maybe a few months longer, and sadly, that's what we see from this career. Um, Cardiovascular deaths are just probably our number one killer. I know it is for most Americans, but especially in law enforcement.
Yeah. And it's really heartbreaking for me to hear those statistics, that you go through this career and you do the hardest job in the world, and then you have 3 to 5 to 7, maybe if you're lucky, years statistically. And my hope is that, to your point, that there can be resources and tools and training that helps to prolong that, so that you guys do have as many years in retirement as you did in the career. I think that's the goal, right? Like, how can you get 25, 30 years out of retirement?
Yeah.
Um, we talked a little bit offline about um, wellness in the context of training, and how you can incorporate this so that they're viewed very similarly. You have training that's mandated, yes?
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Firearms, defensive tactics, things of that nature.
Yes.
Do you think that it's realistic, or do you think that there's a world where wellness training would be a part of that mandated training, and that they're viewed the same, that this is just a part of the job? This is what's going to keep you safe out on the streets. Like this, these are tactical tools that are going to help you to stay safe and to create that longevity in your career. Do you think that that is something that might happen, or something that you would like to incorporate?
So yeah, so let me break that down, because
Okay.
when you talk about the state mandated stuff, it's kind of like firearms. You're required to shoot and qualify with your weapon once a year.
Mhm.
That's not enough.
Okay.
But those are usually the mandates that come out. So when I hear mandates, I hear it's just another box that the officer
Got
will
it.
check, and not something that's going to prolong their life or really benefit them. So I think what needs to happen, one, every agency should be a training agency, a learning agency, meaning that they're constantly trying to get better, whether, and there's lots of ways to do that. That's a whole nother topic, but you have to be an agency that, hey, you know, that we train and we're going to train all the time to get better. And that's where you incorporate those other wellness things that you can incorporate in that, where it's not just something that's mandated, but it's again building into the culture of your agency that that's what we do and that's how we do it. And I'd rather see it coming proactively from agencies rather than mandated from the state, because we spoke about that at our training just this past week. And if it comes from the state, it's not going to be something that's worthwhile. It's going to be something that they force onto the officers, another box to check. We need to be intentional about it and create a program for our agencies that works for each agency, because they're not all going to be the same.
Right.
But we need to do something that will benefit our officers. And again, um, that stuff that mandated. It's just not enough training. So I'm intentional about training here with our officers anytime, and we operate a little different in a school setting, which has its benefits. Uh, anytime we don't have students at schools, on the teachers in service days and stuff, we're training. So we get an extra about 15 or 16 days a year to just train. And we're usually taking advantage of that. That's going to the range, that's, doing all kinds of training related to our job. And also what I'm trying to implement during these days are wellness days that are just whole days dedicated to that. And I know not every agency has the ability to do that because they're 24-hour agencies. When do they find the time? And those are the problems that they're going to be facing. Luckily, we have a little bit more opportunities. So I think really those of us that do have those opportunities really should be taking advantage of that, especially when we have those extra days added in where we can train and get better.
I appreciate the mentality of it's not a one size fits all, and you have to figure out what works for you and how you can create that culture and how you can make it work. Do you see that most leaders are on the same page with creating a culture of wellness and, putting wellness into training? Do you think that that's something that is cohesive?
I think it's it's more so now than in the past. Um, you know, it takes leaders at the top that are proactive and intentional about it. Unfortunately, not everybody's like that. But it's being spoke of more now, especially the training that we're going through now. This is training that that many leaders in Texas go through, and the fact that they're talking about it, I think, is going to help
Yeah.
more leaders want to implement this stuff in their agencies.
Yeah. I want to go back to the quote that you said earlier because I thought that that was really powerful. You had said this to me earlier too. You said, rather than demanding perfection, teach them how to perform through the imperfections. Can you maybe just dive into that a little bit more and talk a little bit more about resiliency and how you can train and learn to perform through the imperfections and how you can have that resiliency to keep going and have a long career?
Yeah, so to me, that means that you're being a proactive agency, not a reactionary agency, a proactive leader, because if you're sending your officers out there without the tools that they need, they're not going to be able to perform in those areas. And when we send officers out there, they're with all these weapons they have, they're trained on all these weapons, but a lot of times, you know, there's areas that are missed. There's training that is missed. Just with the wellness, the fitness, and all that stuff, and we send them out there and expect this perfection, and we don't prepare them ahead of time for um, everything they're about to be introduced to, and it goes back to having that culture of a training and a learning organization and culture where officers are constantly being challenged and trained and being prepared to go out there, because unfortunately we're just not there yet. um, it's a hard thing, it's an easy thing to say, but it's a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
um, but you know the law enforcement leaders have to equip their officers, and I just don't think we're doing a great job at that right now, um, with preparing them to go out there in regards to wellness, because you're talking about we're sending them out there into these environments that are just they're some of the worst environments imaginable, and they come back carrying all this weight, all this trauma that they have, and there's no decompression from that. There's no debriefing. There's just it's day after day, and we're not focusing on their mental well-being or their physical well-being, um, and it's causing lots of issues down the road.
Yeah. And I would imagine too, I mean, when you're better trained, you're more confident.
Mhm.
And I've felt that. I think for me, in any situation, if I am not completely confident walking into a situation, like that is not a good feeling, like when you don't feel prepared for something, and so I think if you can relate to that, it doesn't even have to be in the context of your career, it could just be life where you walked into a situation, you're like, wow, I was not prepared for this. And that feeling that you get in your stomach of like, oh no, like here we go, and so I think the more, like you said, the more you can instill the training, the preparedness, and the confidence to be able to handle it. But then there also is always going to be reactionary stuff, right? Like there's always it. You can be so proactive, but to your point, you can't prepare for everything. And it's
Correct.
certainty that you're going to go through hard things, especially in this profession. I know that you have a plan. I know that you're actively working towards building a culture of wellness. What do you think are some of the resources that all organizations should have for more of that maybe reactionary stuff? Or how can you integrate, or maybe I should ask, what resources could be integrated to be able to better support physical and mental wellness?
Well, I think we're starting to see some of those things. There's lots of new peer support and programs out there that are for after the fact, uh, and and while I don't necessarily consider those reactionary, I think those are things that haven't always been there for officers.
Yeah.
Now it's becoming reactionary because they're not there. They never have been. But now there's programs out there that officers can reach out to, that are having mental health problems, or it could even be alcohol or substance abuse problems, unfortunately. And you know we're on the reactionary end of that. However, I think we're getting to a point where I wouldn't consider reactionary. We have programs in place after these situations. I've always heard, paramedics, they kind of go out there every night and see a lot of the things we see, a lot of the trauma that we see, they see as well. But they have counseling, they have all kinds of things that have been in place for years that kind of in law enforcement, it's just kind of been looked over and not something that we need. So I think having those programs in place, and it's promising that we're seeing a lot of those come on now. There's several programs out there and lots that we talked about in our training that I think are going to benefit us, that officers will have access to when they need it.
I really like that thought process. I've never had it put that way. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, ooh, that's like a new way to think about things. And I really appreciate that because I think that you're right. If you are proactively preparing for what is going to happen, then that's not reactionary. That is being proactive because you're saying, okay, you know what? Like we know that after a critical incident, we're going to need to get them these resources so that they can offload those things. We know that there needs to be some sort of, SISM or, peer support team or whatever that is. And so those are proactive measures that happen maybe after an incident. And the reactionary stuff would be if there wasn't anything at all and someone went through something big in their life or a breaking point or whatever, and now we have to deal with it because it wasn't being focused on before. I
Yeah,
appreciate that perspective. Thank you
yeah, and
for that.
yeah, no, and that's kind of the reason I'm starting our wellness check-ins with a psychologist,
Yep.
every year, because if I wait to implement that and then something big happens or something, blows up, it's too late then.
Yeah.
Now we're being reactionary. What are we going to do? So I think by putting those things in place now, we're being proactive. It's when you wait till something happens, then you're being reactionary, and then you're already so far behind. It takes years to catch up. So, but I
Yeah.
think we're in a good place now where these things are coming online, and there's more programs out there, and I think it's only getting better. It's going to take time, but I think we're getting there.
I agree. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career in the context of wellness? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way?
And I think I spoke too soon earlier, and I kind of added that in there, and it was, really it's developing those habits early because again, throughout our career, if you're in this career long enough, you see so much over time. You go into these chaotic situations. They're emotionally charged, and you're doing this day in day out, and you're constantly trying to be everything to everyone. You're trying to perform perfection when you go out there. You can't make a mistake. You make a mistake, you get in trouble, you get written up. You know we're given great power, which comes with great responsibility,
Mm.
and that's what I would tell somebody early on in their career, that they really have to prepare early on. They can't don't chase that perfection, chase that preparation. Prepare the best you can. That way, when you get there, you're not trying to start when it's too late or when it's already all come to a head. So you really just it's you know don't chase that perfection, chase that preparation. And because there's lots of demands in this job, and they just culminate over the years, and that pressure that builds up, the consequences to that is your own well-being. It's the cost of your own well-being. So you have to prepare early on, and creating those habits that will carry on the rest of your career. Because again, when you try to start midway through, it's tough. There's lots of resistance to that change.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do think that that question has come up a lot for me personally, where I think if you can zoom out to and you can ask yourself that question, what is the cost? What is the cost of not being prepared? What is the cost of not being physically and emotionally and mentally well? Like, what impact is that going to have, and what is that going to cost you? And I think that if you can take a look at that, that usually will outweigh what it takes to actually be well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think like because I think it's hard. It's not easy to be prepared. It's not easy to train. It's not easy to work out. It's like those things are challenging, but like that's a lot easier than losing your family. It's a lot easier than losing your life or your career or having an injury or, there's so many things that we could say or. And so I think that is an important question. What is the cost of not being prepared and not being physically, mentally well?
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important early on to get started with those habits and those things, because life hasn't happened quite yet. You may not have a family, you don't have all the pressures that you have, so it's so important to get those habits started early and just start preparing, for everything that's going to come. And, just while you can't prepare for everything in this profession, I think you can have a sense of preparedness to where you're resilient to those things when they do happen.
Yeah.
And because it's how you bounce back from those things. And because there's going to be tough times in this profession. Um, and you can only bounce back if you're healthy mentally, physically, and emotionally. And if you haven't prepared for that, it's tough to bounce back from that.
Thank you for saying that because one of my favorite definitions of resiliency is the amount of time it takes to get back to baseline. And so it's exactly what you said. Like, how can you bounce back? How can you get back to your baseline as quickly as possible? And so it's not that there aren't going to be peaks and valleys in things. Like, there's always going to be ebbs and flows. There's always going to be things that happen, but how quickly can you get back to that, like, quote unquote, norm or baseline so that you can have that longevity and keep going?
Absolutely.
Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. I
Appreciate
appreciate
it.
the conversation.
I'm sitting here laughing a little bit because I feel like, we're having this conversation. We're like, hey, young bucks, like listen to us old people, like don't make our, like like follow or don't follow in our footsteps, like, choose something else. But I think that the more we can have these conversations, to your point, the more we can, inspire and educate. And, hopefully there's people who are gaining some valuable insights and maybe some motivation to start, focusing on it. So I appreciate you spending your time with me and sharing your insights. And yeah, that's all I have for you. But if there's anything I missed, I'll let you take the floor. But I just appreciate your time so much.
No, thank you so much again. No, I appreciate you having this conversation, especially someone that's not in law enforcement, people that are outside of our organization or our uh, profession having these conversations, and it's much needed. So, and I appreciate you know all the help that we can get because we definitely need it and we need to progress forward. And I think if we're not having these conversations, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. We'll
Well,
stay in touch for sure. And thank you to everyone who's listening. We'll see you again next time.
all right, thank you.